I'm sorry, guys, for the blips, but we'll do our best to press on here. So uh, today's all about thinking. It's about critical thinking and strategic thinking. And Jane and I are really excited about this session. I know it's our last one, so we're also a little bit sad about it too. But this is such an important topic for us to really talk about today. And so we want to really kind of press in to what it means to do these types of thinking. We're going to give you a little bit of high level, and we're going to give you a lot of super practical. So hopefully that will be really useful to you before we go into breakouts today. We have breakouts kind of orchestrated in a little bit different way too that we'll tell you all about. But first off, let's start by thinking about critical thinking. So this is a skill that we all need to have. And I just want to boil it down really to kind of one slide to think about what is critical thinking really and how do we use it. And it's mostly around the things that you see on the slide here. You might do sort of a mental check as you look at this bullet.
Elise,
Can you hear me?
I don't think,
yes.
Yeah, but you're not sharing.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
So sorry. Let me try again.
You were, it was perfect. You had them up and big and.
Okay. Let's try now. Does that work now, Janet?
It does.
Yes.
Okay. I'm so sorry, guys.
And maybe just go to the slideshow mode so people can see it.
Slideshow mode. Great. Let's do that. We'll try again. There we go. How does that look? Okay. Okay.
Yes.
Great. Thank you. Okay. Again, my apologies.
That's okay.
You might take a quick look at the bullets on this slide here and do a mental check with yourself to say, how am I doing in critical thinking skills? And of course, this is when we want to be a bit more on the analytical side. You're being decisive, you're trying to exercise good judgment, and you're thinking about, the things like sort of how to solve problems is the way I think about this. And this is a skill I think that we use all the time as leaders, and we want to be really good at polishing these skills. But strategic thinking is where I want to spend the most of my couple of minutes with you. And I think Janet's going to put her focus here as well, to think about what it is that when we think a little bit more broadly, we think a little more deeply, we think about the longer time horizon. That's really sort of what begins to make the difference when we shift from the critical, which is the analytical, to thinking much more about deeper, bigger issues. And again, do a mental check for yourself. How do you think you compare, or how do you think you would score yourself in some of these categories? And I remember from our earlier conversations a couple of weeks ago when you all did the changed leader assessment, and some of you in the chat box were saying, help, I'm feeling like I'm struggling in some of these areas. So these are going to remind you again of some of those types of skills that you really want to have, to be visionary, to really think about how you make big impact and focusing your attention on the right things. And of course, right now, especially, how do we stay future focused? How do we keep sort of one eye on the road in front of us and really look to the turn to be able to anticipate the things that are coming, and how do we make a game plan for those sorts of things? This reminds me of a story. My husband and I were in India a couple of years. I don't know if any of you all have ever been to India, but put it on your bucket list. It's a pretty amazing place. But there was this one day when we were in the city of Jodhpur, which is this old city in Rajasthan, one of the states of India. And my husband and I found ourselves in this tuk-tuk. So if you don't know what a tuk-tuk is, it's like a three-wheeled kind of motorcycle that's open air, no seat belts or anything. And you kind of weave your way through all of the crowds, the cows and the bicyclists and the pedestrians. And it feels very chaotic. And we got out of this tuk-tuk, and we were standing there in the middle of this street scene, and it was like a swirl happening all around us. And fortunately, we had a guide with us, and he just almost literally took us by the hand and took us up a couple of flights of stairs. And we came out onto this balcony. We saw this amazing view of Jodhpur. And all of a sudden, I had this sense of, oh my gosh, like, when I was down below in the street scene, I could not even find my way forward. But when I get up here, I can see the entire city. And everything became very clear to me. And I thought, this is a lesson that I don't want to be lost on me as a leader, which is, how do I get on the balcony more often? Because I find myself a lot of times caught up in the swirl of the day to day. The urgent, the phone calls, people rushing into your office, or these days, sending you a quick email, hey, can you help me solve this problem, which is important, right? These are the things that leaders need to do. But we really cheat ourselves and our teams and our organizations if we're not pausing at different times in our leadership leadership to get on the balcony. Because when we get on the balcony, we can see more broadly, we can see more deeply, we can see for a longer time horizon. And so I have 3 questions that I want you to just make a quick note of here. These are the types of questions you would ask yourself on the balcony. And to me, I thought these are questions we ask ourselves right now on this sort of edge of COVID-19 and coming out of this particular phase of this pandemic, is how do I figure out what the heck is happening? What changes are coming to my organization, to my customers and my clients' organizations, and what are those impacts going to be? And what am I supposed to do about it? And this is what people look to you as a leader for. Like some of the other stuff, the problem solving and the short-term things, we can all deal with those things. But really they turn to you in the end, they say, what do we do now? And which way do we head? And that's why I think strategic thinking is crucially important for us. So I hope you all have seen it. For those of our international friends, I hope you've seen this movie too, Apollo 13. It's a great movie. And there's so many wonderful movie clips, and they have really good leadership lessons for us. You remember the one where they were putting all the items on the table. You know, you're gonna have to make us this fit with this, you know, which is a great example of problem solving, right? Critical thinking skills. But this particular scene where Tom Hanks says, Houston, we have a problem, it's when the initial crisis happened. So I thought, you know, think at a moment in time when everything was going along really well and you were blindsided, right? So that's exactly what has happened with COVID-19, but we've had many other experiences like that as leaders. When the unexpected happens, and then what are you supposed to do? What do you do when everything that was working for you normally no longer works? This is the real test of a leader, because this is when your strategic thinking skills are going to be called into play. So I've got one particular, what I call future thinking skill that I'm going to share with you. And for those of you that have already joined me in the future thinking leader class, you know, you're going to find some of this familiar. But I love this one skill of sense making. I wrote a blog post on it a couple of weeks ago too, because I just thought there's something in this that's really interesting. There's some good work and some articles out there if you want to Google this to find out a little bit more. But sense making is a thing. It's a leadership skill that you can really develop that helps you really answer this question of what's going on. And so it's not necessarily when you're leading through change, although it could be. It's not necessarily when unexpected things happen, but it might just be when you sense that things are different, that what has happened in the past is sort of what you know now doesn't really work anymore. So there's some particular types of skills that you really need to develop as a sense maker. And these are just 3 of them that kind of made the most sense to me to share, which is grasping the scope of the problem and really understanding how that works. You know, what is kind of get your arms around the problem, creating a framework for a possible solution, and then being able to take action. So sense making skills are really good because they help you really see across all of the things that are happening around you in your particular situation. It also might be learning about shifts or change in culture or society or politics or business or in your specific industry or what's going on with your clients' businesses. I also think that this is very similar to something called adaptive leadership. This is another thing I would encourage you to do a little bit of a Google search on. Adaptive leadership is the type of leadership that we need to have right now as leaders, because it's basically solving new problems with new solutions in real time. And I really like that idea because it really helps us begin to think about how do I begin to make that shift? How do I help my team move from sort of taking care of the urgent that's happening right now to begin to think about what we need to create that would be different as the solution going forward. So how do we practice sense making? Let me tell you just a little bit about that. I'm going to give you some quick things that you can try. I want you to think of sense making as sort of charting a course for the unknown. And to me, this was like map making, if you will, or cartography, the skill of cartography. How do we figure out how to create a map when we are sort of lost on the mountain and we have no idea about how to find a way back to base camp? So there's some ways that creating a map, if you will, or sort of mapping confusion, helps your team So I want you to think about this a little bit more of not just where does it lead you and your thinking, but how you get your team to move in the right direction. And the first one here is to just create a common focus. If I'm organizing everybody around the map, you know, we're all sort of sitting down and we're trying to figure out which way do we go, it creates a common focus and you pull everybody's energy toward working on this one particular problem. You also decide which way you're going to go because there's probably lots of routes. So again, thinking about a problem that you're trying to solve in your organization, which path are you going to choose forward? You're going to have to pick one. So it would be better if you and your team could be thinking about this together. As you're going on your path, you want to be able to pay attention to the cues in the environment. And part of what I like about this is you don't always know which way to go, right? Sometimes we place these bets that this is what we're going to do and this seems the right direction to take, but we don't really know. And so as you're moving forward in your map making and going forward as a team, you're going to have to be able to look around to understand, is this the right way to go? Or have we run into a dead end? Or is this a crossroads? Or is it a detour? And how do we have the resiliency to continue to go? But I also think that creating the map is a lot about getting people into a toward state of mind. So I back just trigger. You know, these are people that are like, I don't want to go here unless I know the way forward. So how do I know that this is a way that I should go? You want to think about how do I minimize the certainty, the uncertainty that people have. You want to move people from sort of feeling anxious about not really knowing to be able to take action, because a lot about sense making and this idea of making a map is taking people forward and creating action so that they're putting their energies towards the things that are positive instead of feeling anxious about where they are. You're calming their limbic system, right? Because when you're in an away state of mind, you're more fearful and defensive and you're less willing to take risk and to try new things. But the one thing that I really like a lot about this idea of sense making is that it's not about being accurate. And this is a really key point for us to remember as leaders, is that not everything we do is going to be exactly right. But you want to be able to try and you want something to be plausible. So instead of focusing on being accurate, which sometimes means I might hold on to things too tightly and I'm a little afraid to try some things, that can I be plausible? Can our team move forward and take some action and know that we've made pretty good sense about what we're willing to try, but of course we'll learn as we go. So couple of quick steps about how you make sense making, put it into action. And I liked this idea, this picture too, to remind yourself that as you're going through this process of discovery, you're going to start with what seems simple to you because it was something that you knew. And then it becomes complex because you have all these considerations. The first one is I just want to challenge you to broaden your inputs. This is an area that I think as leaders, sometimes we can get lazy because we depend on certain types of inputs to help us make decisions. We read certain things, we talk to certain people, we attend the same conferences, although nobody's attending conferences now, but ideally, you know, you're getting broader exposure. And I want to challenge you to say, are you really broadening your inputs? Have you decided to subscribe to some new thinking in some ways? Maybe sometimes you decide it for people's newsletters or their blogs, or go, as we've talked about before, go to some of the big consultancy groups, get some of their white papers, talk to people internationally. We've got a couple of good friends here on the line, Bettina and Victoria, that live in other parts of the world. And I know some of you all work very internationally anyway, but just take a moment to check in with them and get a different perspective. I think that's really valuable for us as leaders to make sure that we are broadening the inputs we have. The reason I have competitors on there is because I always tell people, go and look at your best competitors, not to steal their ideas, of course, I know you wouldn't do that, but to say, why is that working for them? If I were objective about my competitors and I could see that they're doing some things well, what is it they're doing well? How do I do something similarly for my company? Take some sort of initiative that might move us further down the path. And then other industries, of course, because there's always great ideas in other industries that you can simply adapt and modify to your own. I put the Power of the Week tie here because I just want to remind you all that this is such a great concept for us that we tend to overlook. How many of us a lot of times would say, I wish I knew somebody who might introduce me, have an idea, have a resource or a connection that I could leverage, but I don't really know them. If you are consistently doing a good job of nurturing your weak ties, which are all those sort of connection number 2 and 3 on your LinkedIn page, how much more can they enrich your thinking? The Power of the Weak tie is a lot of really good, interesting reading out there, but it's proven over and over again that this is really on the edges of your relationships are where your best ideas will come. So don't cheat yourself by only talking to and thinking about the same things all of the time. So here's another way that you can broaden your inputs too, is to just look at the different types of data that are available to you. I've listed a couple of them here because I want to make sure that you're fully thinking through what are all the resources that I actually have at my disposal, whether it's internal research or external sources. Certainly trade associations are really good ideas because they give that stuff away for free because that's what you pay your membership for. So your company should have access to good trade associations, and of course experts and consultants can help you, but look for interesting and different and rich data that would inform your thinking and maybe bring you up to speed on something that's really shifting that you want to be more aware of. I love this quote here because I thought this is a really good reminder for us that sometimes it's our mindset, how we approach the learning journey that is so key here. We want to make sure that we ourselves are in a toward state of mind. And of course, that we're also avoiding some of the decision-making biases that happen when we approach something where we kind of already have our mind made up. We want to make sure that we don't do that. I shared this idea too, Genchi Gabutsu. I don't know if you all have heard this before, but it was was very popular, made popular by the Toyota Production Group, which is the idea of sometimes you need to go and see by going to the production floor and being on the front lines of an operation to see it more clearly. And I think the learnings are so powerful for us as leaders today because sometimes we don't go to the front line. We haven't stayed as close to the customer as we should have or could have been. We haven't taken advantage of the fact that we have a call center that you could listen in on customer calls or go and read social media, for example, in your company's social media pages to understand what are the comments that people are actually making. What is it that is the real experiences that are happening for customers? I remember with my PR firm, when Walmart was a big client of ours for many years, and we used to, when we had new people come on the Walmart account, we would say, you've got to go spend a day walking the floors at a Walmart store, just shadow the store manager. And you come back not only sort of very tired and out of breath, wishing you had more in your tennis shoes, but you came back with so much insight about, wow, I really get and understand now how the front line of the company works and what it is that we need to do to help managers do a great job. And so again, just getting to the front lines, going and seeing for yourself can sometimes be very enlightening. And then open your mind by inviting diverse perspectives. And some of this seems obvious, but I would also challenge to say, I don't think I always do this. And I don't know if you do either, but I think it's really critical that we intentionally invite different perspectives. This is where you can have your biggest aha from your team or from those outside your organization. Because remember, this is one of the cognitive strategies we talked about in our first session. Having third-party perspective, that fresh outside perspective, can really help you to have a better sense of what's really going on. And then I want you to create a map. And Janet, I'm getting ready to turn it over to you here in just a second. But once you have been going through sense making and you've gathered a lot of information, sort of you've gone through a discovery process, and you satisfy yourself that, hey, I feel like I've brought in my inputs, I've really gone to see for myself, I've invited diverse points of view. Now I need to get busy and make a map. And I have on here some questions that I want you to just jot down and think about, which is the types of questions that you could ask your team when you're ready to chart that map together. So remember, going back to the idea of the map making, you don't really know the territory that you're charting a map for, but you need to draw the route with your team. These are the types of questions that you want to ask yourself. And actually, I remember now, this is my download for the week. So you'll have these questions that will come in a download in the Dropbox for you. But I think these are really good questions to lead your team through kind of an open conversation. And if you'll see right there at question 2, where it says, what can't we control, what can we control? I've done this before with my team, and I will tell you, once you ask the question, what can we control, is when you see the shift happen. This is when your team really changes their mindset, because the first 2 questions are a little bit sort of the problem swirling, like, oh my gosh, this is what's happening, we don't like it, to, oh, wait a minute, there's a lot we can really do about this particular challenge, and what is it we want to achieve? And then, of course, the big question, how does our strategy need to change? Or it may be the strategy that you want to develop. So when you think of it like creating the map, it really helps your team be able to circle around you and help you answer those questions together. Janet, I'm going to hand it over to you after this slide, because I don't think we have time for weak signals, but I wanted to just share this slide with you all because this is from McKinsey Consulting. So this is a way that they have helped us frame as leaders to think about how we are moving through what they call these 5 horizons, coming out of COVID. And I like it because I think it actually helps us think about things on a much broader scale. This is the type of framework that you could use when you are planning any type of strategic initiative, of how you're sort of focused, you know, dealing with the urgent, bouncing back from it and returning. But then that 4th step, I think, is probably the most powerful one, which is, how do I need to reimagine the future? What needs to be different? How are things changing? Which is what sense making and creating the map is all about. So Janet, I'm going to turn it over to you. Let me stop sharing here and let you pick back up. Janet, you're probably still on mute. Janet?
I'm not able to unmute her. There she goes.
Okay,
Oh,
there it is. Sorry,
okay. Go back.
I was muted. I was doubly muted, which is very hard to do with me. Very, very hard to do with me.
Okay, great. Just making sure. Go back and start again.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I may have to, let me just stop share and reshare here real quick. Sorry for our tech. We were doing so good the first 4 weeks. The last class, we're having problems. What's going on? All right, so hopefully everybody has their strategic initiative. Thank you to everyone who took the time to email that initiative. It's part of the process of kind of accountability and owning the strategic initiative that you're thinking about implementing. As part of my work as an adjunct faculty member with the Center for Creative Leadership, they really believe in applying the learning as quickly as you can in order to make this real. So what I want you to do is just pull that strategic initiative out, however you wrote it, even if you were to just jot it down on the top of a piece of paper. Some of you turned in big, I would call them like hairy, audacious, tough strategic initiatives that require a ton of moving parts. Others really made them much smaller and manageable. There's no right or wrong answer to your strategic initiative. It depends on, where you're at in the business cycle and what you have the energy to tackle. But what I want to take you through here is a little bit of a lens of how to make your strategic initiative implementable, which is not a word, but I'm just making it up. So how can you leave this session today with 3 quick and easy steps that you can do to kind of start your strategic thinking process? So I think it goes without saying, most of us know the benefits of strategic thinking. And, obviously you're, as leaders in your company, you are responsible and accountable for the growth of the company as well as the evolution of the company. Because if you weren't thinking strategically, eventually that growth would, really slow, and the evolution of the company would cease. And I think we all are familiar with companies who just didn't make it to that, like Jim Collins calls it, like the good to great companies. You can create real breakthroughs. So part of the process of what Elise is saying, using, the Gensu Jimbuchi and some of those other types of tips that she gave us for strategic thinking really help kind of create the breakthrough. So it's not as much the strategic initiative, but it's the process by which you go through to think about that initiative that can create the real breakthroughs. As leaders, you all want to have impact and influence over your organizations, of course. Planning will help you manage complexity now more than ever. Things are becoming very complex in this remote environment. It'll help you solve problems creatively and, of course, make decisions with insights. So when you are, push comes to shove and you're having to defend that strategic initiative, you would have, because you've done the thinking process that we've outlined today, you'll have those insights to be able to call upon if you need to defend your strategic initiative. Strategic thinking, I really believe, is the perfect combination between the rational side of the brain and the intuitive side of the brain. Without getting into the neuroscience of it, I really believe that there is an absolute rational side of strategic thinking. You have to have the collection of hard data, facts, really looking at the evolution of possible probabilities if you go down any certain path, and of course analytical models and the like that are all kind of on that rational side of the house. But great strategic thinking also is the intuitive side, which is kind of thinking about the people. How will you be able to drive influence in implementing your strategic plan? It's kind of accumulating all of these ambiguities and the uncertainties and the gnarly stuff that kind of comes up when you're trying to make a strategic plan happen. And then, you're using that intuition sometimes to even define or identify the opportunities. Many of you, it's not like someone is saying, hey, go and do this strategic initiative. You've recognized something that needs addressing in the organization, and you've developed a strategic initiative to make it better. And the magic sauce, this is like so key for you and all of your people, is that it's your interpretation of the strategic opportunity that makes it so incredible. Because one leader, you're in this role, but another leader could be in a very similar role and would view the strategic initiative and use their strategic thinking quite differently, because it is the balance of the rational and the intuitive, which is very specifically unique to you. So it is a lot. We've put already, even in this session, a lot of different kinds of strategic thinking, questions and things that pop up. Many of you, when you were even identifying the strategic initiative and emailing it to Elise and I, may have been asking yourselves, is this the priority? Where do I start with this? Do I personally have the time to take this on? Maybe you're asking what research I need. But many of you are probably asking many, many other questions, and it really can lead to strategic thinking overwhelm, right? Particularly once you get in and get your hands dirty, you realize, oh my gosh, I've lost track of the outcome. So what I've applied here today are just 7 key levers to help you kind of identify what the next steps are. And without overthinking, I want you to take some notes down today against your strategic initiative that that will impact and be just in a bullet form that will allow you to get to some next steps today. So you're not leaving this session without some commitment on what you'll do next. So the expected impact is the first lever, and it really is, see it in your mind's eye. What does the future state look like once you have accomplished this strategic initiative? And this, I've had some really great executives not even just do this in bullet form, but actually tell it in a story. So the next, if you were to do it, if you were a CIO and you were implementing a, I don't know, a new firewall security system, and you would be, you would have a, zero downtime, no barrier, no barriers broken beyond the firewall, however you would describe what that future state looks like. And who benefits and how do they benefit exactly? How does it connect to the company vision and the mission? Really encourage you to go back to the values of your company and run your strategic initiative against the vision, mission, and values of the company, and make sure that there's strong intersection. What does that plan look like if it's successful in 90 days, a year? If you can go so far out as to go to 3 years, depending upon the scope of your initiative, really think about what that expected impact is. Once you have that in mind, you can kind of start to go down the path of, the first lever of systems and processes. So, reviewing the systems that are currently going to be impacted by your plan, that are already in place. What are the gaps where you don't have a system that will help you implement your strategic initiative? What additional research do you need? So I'm not going to talk about, how to do a SWOT today, but I did put a SWOT worksheet in Dropbox for you, your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities, your threats, and beyond. And then, the strengths and the weaknesses of the current systems that will support your new plan. We're really kind of going down this path. But today, you might just have a couple of systems written down, maybe some software, time tracking software, ticketing software, whatever it is, and maybe even some ongoing processes that might be in a handbook, in an employee handbook or something like that, that could impact your strategic initiative. This one is super important. It's the key team members. And I like to call this identifying your tribe. So you have 2 different tribes when you're in a strategic initiative, and sometimes more, but keeping it very simple for today. The first is your planning team. And this team should be pretty tight, usually no more than 5 people. And they're hopefully coming from diverse areas within the company that will allow you to really think about your strategic initiative differently. This could be even like a focus group or a planning team. And then the execution team. These are very, very different. The planning team is not always the execution team. And I really want you to think about these in 2 different ways. What are their roles? Writing team charters for these individual teams. How will you measure performance? Kind of also what's in it for them to be part of these teams. The strengths and the weaknesses, and then of course, who do you need to get buy-in first for your strategic initiative? Maybe a supervisor, or possibly a colleague or a peer. Measurement and monitoring. So you've kind of got this future impact. You know what this future state looks like because that was the first lever. But when you're kind of drilling down, how will you know when you've succeeded with this strategic initiative? Some of you may, it's kind of like, I want to rework our entire client services division. That's a really big strategic initiative. You want to be able to make it measurable though, so that you can report back and say, here's what we identified as what success looks like, making it a little bit smaller so that it can be measured and monitored. So, as you're going through the phases of your plan, kind of how and what success looks like. And then the investment and budget. So if there's capital outlay, meaning someone needs to write a big check to make this strategic initiative happen, sometimes it's, I call it like the tin cupping approach, going to different leaders and borrowing budget dollars, possibly from their budget line items to make a strategic initiative happen. You know, do you need to forecast for growth or possibly a loss of growth while you're implementing the plan? Sometimes strategic initiatives, there can be some real pain in the first 6 months to a year that may impact growth, so that you can realign for future growth. And then what is the expected return on that investment, and when will you hit that ROI? You're not going to have the answers to all of these questions. I'm just giving you thought starters here to kind of get those juices flowing against your own SI. Communication, of course, I couldn't have the 7 levers without the communications piece. You know, it's like, who needs to know now? And I think that a lot of leaders do make missteps here in a strategic initiative, in that they've identified they have this big strategic initiative and they communicate maybe a little bit too soon and a little bit too broadly. You really want to first meet with that planning team, vet your thinking, you know, assess what the framework is, and really have it pretty mapped out before you move into broader communication. Identifying, again, those key stakeholders. You know, maybe it's at some point you may want to involve the media and be in your local or trade magazine. It could be the employees, the local government. You know, who are those stakeholders that are going to be impacted once your plan enters fully into the execution phase? And what's the first communication milestone? Maybe that is an all hands company meeting or something like that. And then finally, timing. So COVID, we're here. You know, what does that mean for a reasonable time frame to begin your plan? Some of you are thinking this is actually a great time. We're working remote. People have, you know, time and bandwidth to pick this up, or maybe they don't. It depends on, you know, your initiative, your company. The timing is critical, because you also want to know, when do you expect this to be complete? Because that will have to do with how you're going to get buy-in, and what could possibly get in your way to starting a strategic initiative now. And then how much of your time is required, and what is the impact? So many of you have day jobs. You're running call centers and an entire global operations. If you are going to really own a strategic initiative, thinking through your other job responsibilities, what might be delegated, because I think what happens is leaders will have a tendency to say, well, if I have time for strategy this week, you know, I'm going to work on that on Thursday from 3 to 4. You know, if you're really owning a strategic initiative, it should probably be permeating much of your day-to-day work. Not always, but you really want to make sure that you have time and that you've thought through the impact if you really want to move a strategic initiative to completion, particularly on a tight timeline of, say, 4 to 6 months or something like that. Again, depends on the scope. So those are the 7 levers. Hopefully I've given you some things to kind of think about. What we want to do when we go into breakouts today is to start to think about, and these could be very, very simple, you guys. I don't need them to be, you know, a massive research undertaking here. Just 3 steps, 3 things that you're going to commit to on this call to investigate and further flesh out your strategic initiative that you identified coming onto this call. Step 1 might be meeting with your planning team, identifying and meeting with your planning team. Step 2 could be meeting with accounting to forecast the expense budget to support your SI. And step 3 could be, you know, I don't know, you know, meet with your marketing coordinator to start the competitive research that needs to be completed. I don't want these to be really big. I want them to feel kind of small and tangible, and most importantly, doable. The handout, I'm not going to get into this too detailed. It's up in the documentation library in Dropbox. It's what I call like depth thinking. It's a really good, like, who, what, when, where, why, how of when a plan comes to you. Print this out, put it in front of you to ask your teams, and it'll also be something that you can vet your own strategic planning through. So we're going to go into breakouts now.